Over 330 million Americans watched as Congress turned into a battlefield. J.D. Vance thundered that Elon Musk belonged to Trump's GOP, a Jasmine Crockett unleashed bombshell evidence that could shatter an entire movement. The clash wasn't just about politics, it was about power, betrayal, and the survival of American democracy. Every headline screamed as the chamber erupted in chaos. What truth did Jasmine Crockett reveal that left even the vice president frozen in silence? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The gavel slammed down, and in that instant the chamber ceased to breathe. Every reporter's pen froze, every camera tilted forward, every heartbeat in the room seemed chained to what was about to unfold. This was no ordinary hearing. This was a battlefield disguised in marble and oak. J.D. Vance rose first. Tall, rigid, his silhouette cut against the floodlights like a general preparing for war. His voice, cold and deliberate, carved through the silence. Elon Musk does not belong to chaos. He belongs to the Republican Party, and tonight, we will prove it. His words thundered as if scripted for history, and yet behind his controlled cadence was something darker, the quiet tremor of a man who knew he was defending not just a party, but the fragile grip of Trump's legacy. Across the aisle, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. Her eyes never left Vance, not for a second. She could feel the weight of his words pressing against her chest, designed to intimidate, to suffocate, but beneath her calm surface was fire. Crockett had been underestimated before, as a black woman, as a fighter for the voiceless, as a truth-teller in a city built on half-truths. She remembered every slur, every smirk, every attempt to silence her, and tonight, she carried a weapon far deadlier than anger, the truth Vance feared most. The chamber air thickened. Viewers across the nation leaned closer to their screens. They had tuned in for politics. They stayed because the tension now felt like the seconds before a car crash. Vance pressed on, his rhetoric sharp as steel. Loyalty. Law. Order. He painted Musk as the crown jewel of the GOP, a figure chained to Trump's will. To his allies, it was reassurance. To Crockett, it was the sound of democracy being strangled in plain sight. Her hand brushed over the folder at her desk, documents, recordings, fragments of a secret that could tear Vance's narrative apart. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the gravity of what it meant to release them. Once spoken, there would be no return. Once revealed, America would no longer see Vance as untouchable. The decision was hers alone, and the cameras were waiting. For a fleeting moment, she closed her eyes. She saw the faces of those she represented, single mothers in Texas, workers crushed by policies written for billionaires, communities dismissed as collateral damage. They had placed their hope in her. She could not betray them with silence. The gavel struck again. Vance finished his opening declaration, smug and unyielding. The chamber erupted in applause from his side, orchestrated and hollow. But the silence on the other side was deafening. It belonged to Crockett. She stood slowly, her presence commanding the room, her shadow cutting through the light like a blade. Every camera pivoted. Every breath caught. This was the moment, and as her lips parted, America braced for the words that could dismantle J.D. Vance in front of 330 million witnesses. What truth would Jasmine Crockett unleash that could leave him gasping for air? J.D. Vance gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles pale against the polished wood. His voice rolled out steady and sharp, a practiced weapon. America does not have room for betrayal. A third party is nothing but a knife aimed at the heart of our republic. And Elon Musk, brilliant, visionary, knows where he belongs, with us, with order, with the Republican Party. Every syllable struck like a hammer against stone, and his supporters punctuated the rhythm with nods, smirks, and murmurs of approval. He raised his chin higher, eyes scanning the gallery as if daring anyone to object. Without loyalty, he continued, we invite chaos. Without order, we invite destruction. We are not here to debate illusions. We are here to secure the future of America. And that future does not include political vanity projects disguised as freedom. The words were heavy, calculated, meant to choke dissent before it could bloom. But dissent was already in the room. Jasmine Crockett's chair scraped back, the sound slicing through the applause like a blade. The cameras snapped toward her. Slow zoom. Her figure rising against the flood of lights, her gaze locked on Vance with a defiance that seemed to crack the chamber walls. For a beat, silence stretched, then she spoke, her voice cool, sharp enough to draw blood. You're not protecting democracy, Senator. You're kidnapping it, the chamber gasped as one body. Reporters scrambled, headlines exploding across live feeds before the echo of her words even die. Crockett accuses Vance of kidnapping democracy live. The air thickened with electricity. Whispers turned into shouts, some clutched their phones to capture the moment. Others simply froze, knowing they were witnessing history fracture in real time. Vance blinked, his mask faltering, but only for a second. He forced a laugh, thin and brittle, before growling into the microphone, outrageous. This is slander, a spectacle for cameras, not statesmanship. He gestured toward her with a sweeping hand, his voice booming. You think you're courageous, Congresswoman? All you've done is hand ammunition to our enemies. His allies banged on their desks in support, their nose a desperate wall of sound. Yet Jasmine did not retreat. She stepped forward, one hand resting lightly on the folder she carried, as though it were the weight of the people themselves. Enemies, she shot back, her voice rising. The only enemy here is the fear that drives you to chain one man's freedom to your party's survival. You parade Musk as proof of order, but what you are really selling America is fear wrapped in a red tie. Gasps, shouts, and furious applause tangled into a storm around them. Some called for order, others leaned in hungry for more. The battle line was no longer invisible. It was drawn right down the center of the chamber floor, one side roaring for Vance, the other electrified by Crockett's unflinching defiance. And in that fevered chaos, as the world watched in disbelief, a single question rattled through every living room, every feed, every whispered conversation. Could Jasmine Crockett possibly back up such an audacious charge? The uproar still rippled through the chamber when Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, her voice cutting through the noise like a steady blade. Elon Musk is not your trophy, Senator Vance. He is not a pawn for your political machine. He represents something far larger, the freedom of Americans to choose their future without chains, without coercion. Her words carried weight, not shouted, but sharpened with conviction that struck deeper than fury ever could. For a heartbeat, the chamber quieted, not in agreement, but in anticipation of the next blow. Vance's lips curled into a smirk, his voice dripping with contempt as he shot back. Freedom. Is that what you call chaos? Is that what you call betrayal? Elon Musk is not a symbol of liberty. He is proof that even geniuses recognize the necessity of order. He belongs with us because order is the only thing that can keep America from devouring itself. His allies erupted in applause, but it sounded strained, hollow, like the clatter of shields barely holding against an incoming storm. Then came a new sound, the sudden crackle of a live feed projected onto the screens above the chamber. Gavin Newsom's face appeared, his voice stern and unwavering. Deploying National Guardsmen as political stage props is not leadership, it is abuse of power. If you call that law and order, then you are redefining democracy's dictatorship. The timing was surgical, and the chamber gasped as though the California governor himself had stepped into the room to stand beside Crockett. Vance clenched his jaw, but the cameras caught the flicker of unease in his eyes. Behind him, two figures leaned close, Pete Hegseth and Stephen Miller, shadows whispering poison into his ear. Their words didn't carry across the microphones, but the intent was unmistakable. Hegseth's fist clenched, Miller's lips curled into a sneer. They weren't just advisors. They were agitators, fueling Vance with rage, daring him to escalate. And as Vance nodded slightly, his hand gripping the podium tighter, it was clear the whiskers had found purchase. The nation watched in rapt tension, torn between two visions playing out like a morality play on live television. To some, Vance's call for order resonated with a weary population exhausted by unrest. To others, Crockett's defiance lit the spark of hope that America might yet resist becoming hostage to fear. On the streets outside, protesters' chants clashed, nitrogen monoxide third party, nitrogen monoxide chaos roared against freedom to choose, let Musk speak. The echo reached the chamber walls, a reminder that this was not theater. It was the pulse of the nation, split and raw. Jasmine's gaze never wavered, her voice steady, but her eyes burning. Order without freedom is just another word for control. And tonight, I will show this chamber, and the entire country, exactly how far you're willing to go to strangle democracy in the dark. The words hung heavy, chilling, more like a warning than a promise. And across America, a single thought spread like a spark leaping from screen to screen. What proof could Jasmine Crockett possibly have? Jasmine Crockett's hand moved slowly, deliberately, as though the weight of the entire chamber pressed down upon her wrist. She reached into her folder, her fingers brushing the cool edge of a small silver USB drive. The camera zoomed in, lenses narrowing like hunters scenting blood. A hush fell, thick and suffocating. Every pair of eyes, allies, enemies, reporters, and millions watching from their living rooms, locked on the flash of metal glinting under the chamber lights. Her voice came low, calm, yet vibrating with the promise of detonation. Senator Vance speaks of loyalty, he speaks of order. But what happens when order is manufactured by blackmail? Gasps rippled like a shockwave through the room. Crockett held the USB high, its tiny form now larger than the gavel, larger than the podium, a weapon of truth. This drive contains a recording, one that America has the right to hear. Before Vance could interject, the screen behind them flickered to life, the seal of the United States dissolving into shaky video footage. The sound crackled first, the unmistakable timbre of J.D. Vance's voice, rough with authority. Elon, if you abandon this America Party nonsense, you'll have the White House behind you. Tesla contracts, federal protections, you name it, but if you refuse. The audio hung mid-sentence, as if choking on its own menace. Then the second half dropped like a guillotine. You'll find the IRS crawling through every page of your life. Chaos. Reporters leapt from their seats, shouting over one another, phones flying up to capture the moment. Headlines detonated across Twitter. Bombshell. Vance threatened Musk live recording. The chamber erupted into a storm of noise, boos, cheers, frantic calls for order. Some pounded fists on desks, others shouted fraud, or expose him. The gavel struck again and again, but its hollow thuds were swallowed by the roar. Vance lunged for the microphone, his face pale, jaw quivering with rage. This is doctored. This is a fabrication, a malicious lie. His words broke under the weight of the recording replaying, the same damning line looping like a knife twisting deeper. The IRS crawling through every page of your life. The repetition was merciless, each cycle branding itself onto the minds of viewers across America. And Jasmine stood utterly still, her gaze locked on Vance like a predator watching prey stumble. He didn't shout, she didn't gloat, she let the evidence speak louder than any rhetoric, her silence now more deafening than his fury. For the first time, the mask of control slipped from Vance's face. Sweat traced the edges of his hairline, his hand trembled against the podium. The chamber was no longer divided by ideology, it was consumed by shock. Was this the crack in the dam that would bring the walls crashing down? Millions of Americans gripped their screens tighter, hearts pounding in disbelief, minds racing with one question that could not yet be answered. Was the recording real, or doctored? J.D. Vance exploded from behind the podium, his voice tearing through the chamber like thunder. Fake, he bellowed, his fist crashing down on the desk so hard the microphone shrieked with feedback. His face burned crimson, veins standing out along his temples. This is a lie, a fabrication crafted to tear down this government. And I will not stand here and let a demagogue dismantle the very pillars of law and order. The chamber shook with his fury, his words pounding against the walls like the march of boots. He thrust a finger at Jasmine, spittle flying with each syllable. You claim to fight for democracy, but what you want is chaos. You want to see this country burn so you can dance in the ashes. Patriotism demands sacrifice, loyalty demands unity, and tonight, you spit on both. His allies roared with approval, stomping their feet, clapping their hands, turning his anger into a chorus of defiance. For a moment, it felt as though his rage might sweep the room and drown everything in its path. But Jasmine did not flinch. She rose with deliberate calm, her voice steady, a counterpoint to his storm. Senator Vance is right about one thing. Crime has fallen. 35% in Washington, 55% in robberies, but at what cost? She turned toward the cameras, her eyes burning into the lens as if speaking directly into the living rooms of America. At what cost do we turn National Guardsmen into political props, paraded through Union Station like stage actors, while their mission becomes a photo op instead of public service? The chambers were faltered, replaced by murmurs. Across the nation, Americans recalled their own streets, guardsmen in camouflage on sidewalks in D.C., Portland, Minneapolis. Some remembered feeling safer, others remembered the armies of soldiers with rifles outside grocery stores and playgrounds. On Twitter, hashtag surge, hashtag order or oppression, hashtag Musk threat, hashtag Crockett vs Vance. The country wasn't just watching anymore, it was choosing sides in real time. Vance slammed the desk again, desperate to regain control. You dare question the sacrifice of our men and women in uniform? You dare turn their service into your political circus? His voice cracked, part fury, part panic. Without them, this city would collapse into anarchy. Without loyalty, America crumbles. He pointed at the soldiers in the gallery, uniformed witnesses to the spectacle. These men and women are the shield of our nation, and you dishonor them. Jasmine's reply was soft, almost a whisper, but it cut sharper than any scream. No, Senator, what dishonors them is using their uniforms as props for your ambitions. What dishonors them is reducing their courage to a stage play while you barter freedom for control. The words landed heavy, not shouted but soaked in the gravity of truth. And for a heartbeat, the chamber froze in stunned silence. The storm between them had become more than a clash of voices. It was a duel of visions, fury against composure, control against freedom. The cameras caught every flicker of rage in Vance's eyes, every ounce of resolve in Crockett's calm. And in that breathless pause, America wondered, would Jasmine Crockett stop here, or strike harder? The chamber still quivered from the echo of Crockett's rebuke when she reached again into her folder, this time pulling out a single sheet of paper. She held it up with the pose of a surgeon about to cut, her calm composure masking the bomb she was about to detonate. The cameras zoomed, reporters craned forward, the silence tightening like a noose. Her voice was measured, but each word landed like a stone against glass. Since Senator Vance insists on loyalty, perhaps he can explain why the Wall Street Journal reported that Elon Musk seriously considered launching what he called the America Party. She lifted the page so the headline filled the screens above. Musk's inner circle confirms America Party talks. The words burned into the chamber, undeniable and black on white. If he belongs to your order, Senator, why was he planning his escape? Gasps ripped through the hall, so loud they drowned even the gavel's desperate pounding. Reporters bolted upright, tweeting, live streaming, broadcasting the headline across the globe in real time. The feeds lit up in neon chaos. Hashtag America Party, hashtag Crockett strikes again, hashtag Vance exposed. Twitter's servers buckled under the surge. CNN, Fox, MSNBC all cut to the headline in bold red banners. Vance froze, the words catching in his throat before he could form a rebuttal. His jaw flexed, eyes darting from the screen to Crockett, then to the restless crowd behind the cameras. The mask of invincibility cracked, first a flicker of panic, then the twitch of disbelief. The protege of Trump, the self-anointed steward of order, suddenly looked like a man watching the ground vanish beneath his feet. The chamber itself seemed to collapse into pandemonium. Some senators shouted for order, others screamed over one another, reporters barked questions that dissolved into static. The sound was not a single roar, but 100 different frenzied voices clashing in disarray. It was chaos televised, America watching itself unravel in real time. Through it all, Jasmine remained still. Her calm was almost terrifying, a blade sharpened by restraint. She placed the article down on the desk, fingers tapping it softly, like a drummer setting the tempo for a symphony of revelation. Senator Vance, you want to lecture America about betrayal, then explain this. Explain why the man you call your ally was plotting to create a movement beyond your reach. Explain to every soldier, every worker, every family watching tonight why the loyalty you demand is nothing but an illusion. The words dug deep, not because they were shouted, but because they carried the weight of irrefutable evidence. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, as if the entire chamber held its breath. Vance's mouth opened, but nothing came out. No denial, no rebuttal. Only the stunned expression of a man cornered by his own contradictions. And in that electric pause, the thought that spread across America was no longer if Crockett had proof. It was something far more dangerous, whispered in gasps and flickering across headlines. What other secrets had Vance tried to bury? The chamber still pulsed with the aftershock of Crockett's revelation when J.D. Vance suddenly erupted, his voice rising like a cannon blast. He slammed his fist on the podium so hard the microphone shuddered, his face twisted in rage, eyes blazing under the harsh white lights. This is betrayal, he roared, pointing directly at Jasmine as if his finger were a dagger meant to pierce her composure. You stand not with America, but with chaos. You stand with weakness, with an agenda that hands victory to China and Russia. His words tore across the room like a wildfire. He painted her as a traitor, a politician cloaked in righteousness, but driven, he claimed, by a desire to see America collapse. When you challenge our order, you do not just defy me, you embolden Beijing, you empower Moscow. Do you think Putin isn't watching this circus? Do you think Xi Jinping isn't smiling while you drag our country through the mud? His voice cracked under the weight of his fury, but the cracks only made the performance raw, more primal. Supporters roared, pounding their desks, chanting his name. The sound echoed like drums of war, feeding the fire that Vance stoked with every breath. He thrust his arms wide, his voice now populist thunderclap. America cannot survive if every loud voice thinks they can rewrite the rules. We are a nation of loyalty, of order, of unity. And Congresswoman Crockett, he spat her name like poison, has chosen to side with those who profit from disorder. She has chosen to stand with the mob. Cameras flashed, capturing his rage in freeze frames that would dominate front pages by morning. The spectacle was no longer debate. It was battle, fire against ice, fury against resolve. Yet amid the chaos, Jasmine stood still, her face unreadable, her silence almost unnerving. She let him rage, let him pour every ounce of venom into the air until the chamber itself seemed to shake with his anger. But Vance pressed harder, desperate to break her calm. You think your little papers, your so-called evidence, can save you. They are smoke and mirrors. You are undermining the very soldiers who bleed for this country, undermining the law that keeps our children safe at night. And mark my words, he leaned closer into the microphone, his voice dropping into a growl. History will remember you as the woman who sided with America's enemies. The room quaked with his final words, his chest heaving, sweat glistening under the lights. He had delivered not just an argument, but a public indictment, throwing every ounce of his anger at her like a storm meant to drown her in front of the nation. And yet, Jasmine Crockett did not move. Her eyes never left his, her posture unbroken, her silence heavy with something more dangerous than outrage, anticipation. Across America, hearts pounded with one consuming question. Would Jasmine Crockett falter under his fury, or was she about to strike back harder than ever before? The thunder of Vance's tirade still hung in the air, rattling through the chamber like the aftershock of an earthquake. Reporters scrambled to capture every second. Cameras zoomed in on Jasmine's face, searching for the crack, the tremor, the flicker of fear that might prove his fury had landed. But instead, she stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, her heels striking against the marble floor like the ticking of a clock counting down to detonation. Her voice sliced through the roar with a calm that felt sharper than rage. Betrayal, she said, her tone steady, eyes locked on Vance, is not questioning power. Betrayal is selling democracy to the highest bidder. The words cracked like lightning in the silence that followed, jolting the chamber back into stunned attention. Some gasped, others muttered, but no one looked away. She raised the Wall Street Journal article again, her hand unwavering. You call Elon Musk a traitor for exploring independence. I call him what he is, an American exercising his right to imagine something new. His independence isn't a threat to this nation, it is proof that we are still free to choose, free to dream, free to build without asking permission from you or anyone else who clings to power like a crown. A ripple swept through the crowd. Not applause, not yet, but something heavier. Agreement, resonance. Reporters began typing furiously, their headlines shifting in real time. Crockett strikes back. Betrayal is selling democracy. The weight of her words carried beyond the chamber walls, out into the streets, into the living rooms, where millions sat riveted to their screens. Vance sneered, but Jasmine didn't stop. She stepped closer to the center of the chamber, her voice rising with each sentence. Senator, you speak of China, of Russia, of enemies beyond our borders. But what you fear most is independence right here at home. You fear Musk's independence because it threatens your grip. You fear the people's independence because it reminds them they don't need you to dictate their lives. The audience reacted like a wave colliding against stone. Gasps, murmurs, scattered claps that grew into a rhythm of defiance. The soldiers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging glances, the weight of her accusation reaching even them. On social media, hashtags morphed again. Hashtag betrayal define. Hashtag Crockett vs Vance. Hashtag independence not control. Vance gripped the edge of his podium, knuckles white, the rage in his chest rising like a tie. But Jasmine pressed harder, her words like a hammer against his armor. You talk of loyalty, Senator, but loyalty to what? To your ambition? To a system that uses fear as a leash? True loyalty is to the people. True loyalty is to the right to dissent, to question, to demand better. That is America's order. Freedom first, not fear. The chamber erupted, this time with applause crashing against boos, the sound chaotic, combustible, impossible to contain. For the first time, Vance's voice was drowned out, swallowed by the echo of her defiance. And still Jasmine held her ground, staring at him, daring him to answer. And across the nation, one question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Could Jasmine Crockett land a strike that silenced him completely? The shouting inside the chamber was fierce, but suddenly, another sound broke through. A deeper, more primal roar, the cameras cut outside. Thousands had gathered on the steps of the Capitol, their voices colliding in a furious chorus that echoed across the night. Let Musk choose, let Musk choose. The chant rolled like thunder, punctuated by drums, whistles, and fists pounding against barricades. Placards rose like flames in the darkness. One read, "Democracy isn't loyalty." Another, just as bold, blazed with the words, "Keep Musk MAGA." The divine was visible, raw, undeniable. Half the crowd demanded independence, the other half demanded order. The images played live across networks, split screens showing the chaos outside mirrored by the chaos within, the two storms feeding one another in real time. Inside, reporters' phones lit up with notifications, hashtags exploding, live streams breaking millions of views. Commentators whispered comparisons to Selma, to Occupy Wall Street, to the Tea Party rallies. But this was something new, something jagged. It wasn't just about Elon Musk anymore. It was about the soul of America, whether the future would belong to those who clung to loyalty as law or those who demanded freedom as birthright. Jasmine turned slightly, her gaze catching the sound of the crowd bleeding through the chamber doors. She closed her eyes for half a second, as though absorbing their energy, their anger, their hope. When she opened them again, her voice carried not just across the chamber, but across the nation. Do you hear them, Senator? That's not chaos, that's America speaking. That's the voice of the people you swore to serve. Vance shot back, his tone laced with scorn. That's no's, Congresswoman. Angry mobs always sound loudest before they collapse. They scream of freedom, but beg for order the moment the streets run with fire. His words stoked the fire further, both inside and out. Protesters pressed harder against the barricades, their chants rising louder, the signs shaking above their heads like weapons of truth. Jasmine leaned closer to the microphone, her voice a blade cutting through his dismissal. They are not begging for order, they are demanding dignity. And dignity does not come from fear. It does not come from threats, it comes from choice. The chamber trembled with the weight of her words, the rhythm of the protesters' chants pounding like war drums in the background. Viewers at home felt it too, the line between spectator and participant blurring. For some, it was déjà vu of marches they once joined. For others, it was the first time they realized politics wasn't distant. It was in their streets, in their voices, in their power. Vance's jaw tightened, his knuckles gripping the podium until they blanched. He wanted to shout her down, but the noise outside was growing louder than anything he could conjure. The camera caught the flicker of panic in his eyes, the realization that he was no longer just debating a congresswoman, he was losing control of the narrative to the people themselves. And then Jasmine's hand slid slowly across her folder once more, fingertips brushing something unseen, something heavier than before. The chamber held its breath, and the cameras closed in, hungry for the next twist. Would Crockett risk everything to reveal her final card? The roar of the protesters outside crashed against the chamber walls when, suddenly, another voice ripped through the tension like a gunshot. From the press gallery, a journalist vaulted to his feet, his press badge swinging, his face pale with urgency. "Stop," he shouted, holding a single sheet of paper above his head. The cameras whipped toward him in unison, the chamber falling into a stunned silence. In his hand was not just any paper, it was a leaked email, the header clear, the sender unmistakable, Elon Musk. The journalist's voice trembled, but the words hit like detonations. This was sent directly to Musk's legal team. It details explicit threats from the IRS if he dared to move forward with forming the so-called America Party. Gasps burst from every corner of the room. Reporters dropped pens, senators shifted in their seats, staffers covered their mouths in shock. The gallery erupted into chaos, the kind of frenzy that only comes when history fractures before your eyes. On screens across the nation, banners exploded in red. Breaking. Leak email shows IRS pressured Musk. Vance's face drained of color. He slammed his palm against the desk, barking over the nose. This is a lie, a fabrication. His voice cracked, desperate, but his anger no longer carried the weight of control. It sounded brittle, defensive, hollow against the pounding rhythm of disbelief swelling through the chamber. The journalist pressed on, his voice steadier now, emboldened by the cameras. It's signed by senior officials, names redacted in the copy, but the threats are clear: abandon the third party, or face investigations that would cripple Tesla, SpaceX, and everything else Musk has built. This isn't speculation, this is evidence. Every screen flickered with the words. Every American watching saw the email itself, splashed across their TVs and phones. For some, it confirmed their darkest suspicions. For others, it shattered their trust in the very institutions meant to protect them. And for J.D. Vance, it was a guillotine blade suspended above his neck. Jasmine stepped forward slowly, her eyes fixed on him, her voice low but lethal. You called me a traitor, Senator. You called me an enabler of foreign enemies, but what do you call this? Threatening a citizen into silence, twisting the law into a weapon against independence. That isn't order, that is tyranny dressed in red, white, and blue. The chamber convulsed with noise, some applauding, some screaming, the clash so overwhelming that the sergeant-at-arms could barely contain it. Outside, the protesters' chants turned into a roar of validation, as if the revelation had ripped the mask from power itself. The air felt combustible, every second thick with the possibility of collapse. Vance's hands trembled as he gripped the podium, his face contorted between rage and dread. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught, choked, died in his throat. For the first time, he looked less like a fighter and more like a man drowning before the nation's eyes. And across America, one question cut sharper than all others, whispered in living rooms, tweeted in trending threads, shouted in the streets: would J.D. Vance survive this revelation? The chamber reeked of panic now, the air thick with disbelief and sweat. J.D. Vance gripped the podium as though it might keep him from collapsing, his tie askew, his forehead glistening under the merciless lights. His voice cracked, no longer the commanding thunder had been minutes before but a brittle echo of desperation. This is enemy propaganda, he sputtered, jabbing a trembling finger toward the journalist and then at Jasmine. A foreign smear campaign designed to destabilize us, to destabilize me. The words rang hollow, murmurs swelled in the chamber, doubt spreading like wildfire. Reporters leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Some senators shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to meet the cameras that caught every twitch, every bead of sweat rolling down Vance's temple. And then Jasmine struck. She stepped into the light, her posture straight, her voice like steel. Enemy propaganda, she repeated, the words dripping with disbelief. She held up the printed email once more, her hand steady as a blade. Or is it your own words finally catching up with you, Senator? A paper trail that proves what we've long suspected, that you, not the people, are pulling the strings of power through threats and coercion. The chamber erupted, gasps, applause, boos, a cacophony that blurred into chaos. Headlines flashed across the ticker. Crockett turns Vance's defense against him. Is this the end for Trump's protege? The sound was overwhelming, a storm threatening to drown Vance where he stood. His face reddened as he slammed his palm on the desk again, but the gesture carried no weight now, only the stench of weakness. On the desk again, but the gesture carried no weight now, only the stench of weakness. He stammered, his words tumbling out with no rhythm, no force, only fear. This is lies, all of it. She's twisting it. She's twisting everything. But Jasmine didn't let him breathe. She advanced with the pose of a prosecutor and the fire of a revolutionary. No, Senator, I'm not twisting anything. I'm reading your silence, your panic, your sweat. I'm reading the truth that you've tried to bury under loyalty oaths and fear-mongering. And tonight the people are reading it too. The chamber fell into a taut silence, the kind that swallows oxygen, the kind that signals a man cornered. Vance's eyes darted left and right, searching for allies, for escape, for anything to pull him back from the brink, but there was nothing. Just cameras, just millions of eyes watching a man unravel on live television. And so the question spread like wildfire, whispered by protesters outside, typed into trending hashtags, murmured in living rooms across the nation. Could J.D. Vance still find a way to fight back? The chamber was still shaking from Vance's unraveling when Jasmine moved, not toward him, not toward the senators still whispering nervously behind their folders, but toward the camera. She pivoted with the precision of someone who knew exactly where history would be watching. The red light atop the lens glowed, and in that instant, the millions tuning in felt her eyes lock onto theirs. Her voice dropped, softer now, stripped of the courtroom sharpness she had used against Vance. "This fight isn't about Elon Musk alone," she said, her tone carrying the intimacy of a fireside conversation. "It's about you. It's about every family sitting at their kitchen table tonight, wondering how they'll make rent when the costs keep rising. It's about every worker who watches billionaires play politics while their paychecks shrink." The chamber hushed, the fury replaced by something heavier, the gravity of recognition. Even the protesters outside quieted, their chants dissolving into murmurs as her words streamed through every phone, every television. Headlines blinked on screens in real time. Crockett speaks directly to the people. She leaned closer to the mic, her cadence steady, deliberate. "Senator Vance wants you to believe that loyalty is order. That silencing dissent is patriotism, but let me tell you what loyalty means. Loyalty is fighting for the family evicted because housing costs skyrocketed. Loyalty is protecting children who deserve safe streets without turning their neighborhoods into militarized zones. Loyalty is telling the truth, even when it costs you everything." Vance tried to cut in, but his voice was drowned beneath the swell of applause, the clapping erupting not from his allies, but from the gallery, the reporters, even some of the aides who had moments ago sat frozen. It was chaos, yes, but it was a chaos that leaned toward her. And still, she pressed harder. Her voice sharpened again, like steel tempered in fire. "This isn't just about Musk's emails or about threats hidden behind government seals. This is about a system that believes you'll accept fear over freedom, manipulation over choice. Tonight I'm telling you don't accept it. Don't let them trade your dignity for their power." The cameras caught faces shifting, staffers biting their lips, senators glaring with unease, reporters scribbling so furiously their pens broke against the page. Outside, the protesters found their rhythm again, this time echoing her words instead of their own. The chant rolled across the Capitol steps, "Dignity, not fear, dignity, not fear." Jasmine's eyes burned into the lens one last time, her words carrying across the wires like a spark into dry brush. "This is not about me, it's about you. The question is simple. Will you believe the spin of those who profit from your silence, or will you believe the voice you just heard? Your own." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was electric. It was the sound of a nation holding its breath, caught between disbelief and awakening, between fear and fire. And so the cliffhanger lingered, Ryan, unavoidable. Would America believe her, or believe the spin? The chamber quaked with an energy that felt less like politics and more like an implosion. J.D. Vance's face was crimson, his jaw locked so tightly the veins at his neck throbbed like they might burst. In a sudden, violent motion, he swiped a stack of papers from his desk, scattering them across the chamber floor like shattered glass. The microphone screeched as he roared, his voice jagged and raw. "Traitors, this chamber is full of traitors." Cameras zoomed in mercilessly, catching every bead of sweat rolling down his temple, every twitch in his eyes. His tie hung loose, his fists pounded against the mahogany as if force could drown out the sound of his own collapse. The senators seated behind him shifted uncomfortably, their silence damning, their eyes refusing to meet the lens that was now focused squarely on his unraveling. Jasmine didn't move, she stood in chilling stillness, watching him disintegrate like a predator waiting for its prey to tire itself out. Her composure was a knife against the chaos, her calmness amplifying his madness. Around them, the chamber buzzed with shock, whispers, gasps, frantic typing from journalists whose headlines were already writing themselves. "Vance loses control on live TV." Vance's voice cracked again, but he pushed it louder, hoarser, each word scraping against the walls. "You He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, his hand trembling. "You and your allies are puppets. You want America to burn. You want our enemies to laugh at us while you shred our Constitution in front of the world." The words didn't land as thunder, they landed as desperation. The gallery erupted not with fear but with murmurs of disbelief. The image broadcast to millions was not of strength but of a man cornered, thrashing, his mask torn away. A cameraman's lens caught a close-up, Vance's upper lip quivering, his eyes darting wildly from the crowd to the protesters' chants bleeding through the chamber doors. He looked less like Trump's protege and more like a man watching the earth crumble beneath his feet. And then came the silence, deafening, suffocating. The kind of silence where the world seems to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable collapse. Vance sagged slightly against the podium, chest heaving, a sheen of sweat turning his suit into armor that no longer fit. Jasmine finally broke the silence, her voice calm, devastatingly clear. "The only traitor here, Senator, is the one who betrays the people's trust." The words sliced through the chamber like glass shattering, and every eye turned back to him, broken, cornered, humiliated. And across America, one question burned hotter than all others. Was this the end of J.D. Vance's credibility? The echoes of Vance's meltdown still rattled the chamber when Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, unflinching, her silhouette framed by the storm of flashing cameras. Where Vance had thrashed in fury, she stood in quiet defiance, the steadiness of her breath cutting through the chaos like a metronome. Her voice rose, calm yet unyielding, carrying the gravity of generations before her. "I've faced worse than this, and I will not be silenced today." A ripple coursed through the gallery. The words didn't land like rhetoric, they landed like memory, pulling the nation backward to Selma's bridge, to the voices once drowned out by hoses and batons, to the long road where struggle had never been theory, of blood and bone. Jasmine invoked it now, not as history, but as her inheritance. "I know what it means to fight when the odds say you shouldn't. I know what it means to stand when every force tells you to kneel. That's why I'm here." Her eyes burned into the lens, past the chamber, straight into the homes of millions. "This isn't just my fight. This is every fight of every mother working 2 jobs to keep her family afloat. Every black child told they don't belong. Every immigrant who believes in America more than the politicians who use them as pawns. I carry them with me in this chamber tonight." The chamber quieted under her cadence, the silence not heavy but reverent, as though the air itself bent to the force of her words. Outside, the protesters shifted too, their chants softening into a collective murmur of solidarity. For a moment, the spectacle of politics felt stripped away, replaced by something raw, something that pulsed with the rhythm of survival and defiance. Vance glared, but his fury was useless against the calm fire that radiated from her. Where his sweat betrayed him, her composure became armor. Where his rage fractured, her resolve built bridges across the divide. She stood not just as a congresswoman, but as a warrior, one forged by every injustice she had endured and every injustice she had sworn to fight. And as her final words pierced the chamber, they did not fade, they echoed. "You can try to break me, but you will not break the people who sent me here, not tonight, not ever." The cameras lingered on her face, steady and resolute, and across America the question rose, trembling, urgent, undeniable. Would her words pierce the nation's heart? The chamber, once fractured, was shifting before the camera's unblinking eyes. Where murmurs had wavered between disbelief and doubt, now the air pulsed with a new rhythm, voices rising, first timid, then defiant. A single chant broke the silence, then multiply, filling the chamber walls like rolling thunder. "Crockett! Crockett! Crockett!" The sound spilled past the gallery and into the streets, where protesters picked it up and hurled it back like a battle cry. Outside, handmade signs shook above the crowd. "Justice for the people. Crockett equals courage." Inside, the senators sat stiff, their poker faces cracking as they glanced nervously at the cameras broadcasting their hesitation. On live feeds, the digital tide surged. Hashtags ignited like brush fires across Twitter and TikTok. Hashtag Vance exposed. Hashtag Justice Crockett. Hashtag the people vs power. Millions of phones lit up with the same moment. Vance slumped in sweat and rage. Jasmine standing tall, eyes steady, voice echoing through history. It was more than politics now. It was theater. It was justice. It was a reckoning. Jasmine raised a hand, and the chant softened into a reverent hush. Her voice sliced through, firm but carried by the weight of triumph. This chamber was built for the people's voice, and tonight, that voice is being heard. Each syllable felt like a hammer striking stone, each pause calculated, cinematic, the kind of moment destined to replay in highlight reels for decades. Vance tried to rise, but his words drowned in the chorus of history unfolding without him. His allies shifted in their seats, some lowering their eyes, others inching away from his shadow. The cameras caught it all, the isolation of a man who had once branded himself invincible. For the first time, Jasmine allowed herself a flicker of a smile, not one of arrogance but of recognition. The tide was no longer hers to push, it had turned on its own. The people had chosen their champion, and her name now reverberated through marble and pavement alike. But even as triumph swelled, tension coiled beneath it, waiting, hungry. For all the chants, all the hashtags, all the eyes locked on her, there lingered one unspoken truth. In battles, is seismic, victory required not just momentum, but a final strike, one that would etch her defiance into stone and leave Vance with no escape. And so America leaned forward in their seats, breaths held, screens glowing, hearts pounding with anticipation. What final strike would end this battle? The chamber had fallen into a tense, suffocating silence, broken only by the clicks of cameras that refused to blink. Then, as though drawn by the gravity of a storm, J.D. Vance stepped forward, closing the distance until he stood just inches from Jasmine Crockett. The two figures loomed beneath the searing lights, their shadows tangling on the marble floor like combatants in an arena. His voice was low at first, but venom dripped from every syllable. "You will regret this," he hissed, the threat slicing through the chamber like a knife. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, locked on hers as though daring her to flinch. His chest rose and fell with the rage of a man whose mask was gone, whose empire teetered on the edge of collapse. But Jasmine did not yield. She leaned in, her voice calm yet razor-sharp, carrying the quiet force of a hammer poised to strike. "The only regret here," she replied, every word deliberate, "is that you thought you could own America's future." The line landed with such precision that the room seemed to quake, not with no's, but with the collective gasp of millions watching live. Cameras zoomed closer, catching the stark contrast, sweat glistening across Vance's temples, while Jasmine's gaze burned steady, unshaken, the fire of conviction outshining his fury. To the audience, it looked less like a debate and more like a duel. One fought not with fists, but with truth against power. Vance's voice cracked as he pressed on, desperation bleeding into rage. "You think you speak for the people, you're nothing but chaos wrapped in rhetoric. Order is what saves nations, order is what keeps America strong." His spit hit the mic, his hands trembling as they gripped the podium. Jasmine raised her chin, her reply cutting through the chamber like a blade through glass. "Order without justice is not strength, it is tyranny." Her words thundered louder than his shouts, echoing through the hall, igniting murmurs and nods from faces once neutral. The cameras panned across the chamber, capturing the shift in real time. Vance shrinking into fury, Crockett rising into history. They were inches apart now, voices colliding, their duel so fierce seemed the walls themselves strained to contain it. Every gesture, every breath, every glare was broadcast live, each frame destined to become an image burned into the national memory. The energy was electric, so thick it seemed the air itself might ignite. And in that moment, with America holding its breath, one question remained suspended above them like a blade waiting to fall. Who would break first? The chamber buzzed with raw tension, every camera locked on Jasmine Crockett as she reached into her folder with surgical precision. The silence was so taut it hummed, the nation perched on the knife's edge of revelation. With a single motion, she slid a USB into the chamber's console. The screens above flickered, and then, Elon Musk's voice filled the air. "I don't want to be forced into loyalty. America deserves choice." The words detonated like a bomb. Gasps ricocheted across the chamber, staffers jolted upright, and journalists fumbled to fire off breaking news alerts. Outside, the chants paused mid-breath, protesters staring at the live stream, frozen in collective disbelief. This was no rumor, no doctored headline. This was Musk himself, crystal clear, undeniable. Vance's face collapsed in real time. His lips trembled, his hands clawed at the desk as though he might tear away the evidence with sheer force of will. The man who minutes earlier roared about order and loyalty now looked cornered, stripped bare in the merciless glow of truth. Cameras zoomed in mercilessly, capturing every bead of sweat, every twitch of panic. Jasmine stood unmoved, the faintest ember of triumph in her eyes. She didn't gloat, didn't need to. The recording spoke louder than any speech. Her silence was a weapon sharper than any rebuke, letting Musk's voice hang in the chamber like a verdict from the American people themselves. The shockwave rolled outward. On television screens in diners, airports, and living rooms across the country, viewers leaned in, stunned. Twitter feeds ignited with a single refrain: "He lie, he lie, he lie." Hashtags exploded, hashtags that would define the night. Hashtag Musk truth, hashtag Vance exposed, hashtag Crockett wins. Vance staggered to his feet, searching for words, for any thread of denial to cling to, but the evidence crushed him, every syllable of Musk's voice hammering his credibility deeper into the ground. Allies whispered frantically behind him, some averting their eyes as though proximity alone might scorch their reputations. Jasmine finally broke the silence, her voice steady, carrying the weight of justice fulfilled. This isn't about parties, it isn't about power. It's about truth, and America just heard it. The chamber erupted again, but this time the roar was different, cathartic, like chains breaking, like the first gasp of air after drowning. The tide had turned completely. And yet, beneath the triumph, a chilling question lingered in the electric air, gripping every viewer who had just witnessed history unfold. Would this destroy his career? For a heartbeat, the chamber was frozen in stunned silence, the echo of Musk's words still vibrating through the marble walls. Then, as though a dam had burst, the entire room erupted. Senators rose to their feet. Reporters clambered over one another to capture the moment. The audience gallery thundered with applause so fierce it rattled the glass panels above. The roar spilled beyond the chamber, into streets, into bars, into living rooms across America, where millions stood transfixed before glowing screens. At the center of it all, J.D. Vance collapsed into his chair, his shoulders caved inward, his eyes vacant. The firebrand who had thundered about order and patriotism just minutes before now looked like a man gutted of purpose. Tapers slid from his lap to the floor, scattered like fallen leaves. Each flash of a camera carved his humiliation deeper into history. His allies whispered in hushed panic, but none reached out to lift him. It was the loneliness of a man defeated, and America saw it live. And yet, Jasmine Crockett did not bask in the applause. She did not raise her fists or smile for the cameras. She stood in the center of the storm, head high, eyes steady, her expression not of victory but of resolve. She had struck the blow that cracked Vance's armor, but she knew this was not the end of the war. Only one battle. Her gaze swept the chamber, past the frantic reporters, past the stunned senators, past even the broken figure of J.D. Vance. She was looking at something larger, the soul of the nation itself. Her voice cut through the applause, calm but commanding, drawing every ear back to her. "Tonight is not about one man's lies," she said, her tone both solemn and electrifying. "It is about whether this country still belongs to its people, whether truth still matters, whether choice is still sacred." The applause softened into silence again, this time not out of shock but out of reverence. Millions watching from their homes felt as though she was speaking directly to them, into their very bones. Meanwhile, Vance sat unmoving, his lips parted in a hollow gape. The man who once styled himself Trump's fiercest protege had been reduced to a symbol of hubris crushed beneath the weight of truth. He whispered something to himself, maybe denial, maybe regret, but the microphones did not catch it. What they caught instead was the sound of the people rising, chanting again from the gallery, voices booming like a verdict. Justice, justice, justice. The chamber no longer belonged to power brokers or politicians. It belonged to the people who had taken back their voice, if only for a night. And as the chants shook the very foundations of Washington, one truth became clear: America had crossed a threshold, and nothing would ever be the same. Still, the question hung heavy in the air, an uneasy shadow behind the triumph. What happens to America after tonight? By dawn, America was ablaze. Every headline screamed the same image: J.D. Vance slumped in his chair, drenched in defeat, while Jasmine Crockett stood tall under the searing lights. Networks replayed the recording of Musk's voice on a loop, each repetition twisting the knife deeper into Vance's credibility. Anchors breathlessly called it the most stunning collapse in modern political history. Social media was an inferno. Hashtag surge into global trends. Hashtag Crockett crushes. Hashtag Musk UNCHAINED. Hashtag Vance downfall. Millions of Americans woke to their phones buzzing with clips, memes, and fiery arguments. Some hailed Crockett as a hero, a defender of democracy who had finally ripped the mask from Washington's machinery. Others clung to Vance's shattered rhetoric of order, muttering about conspiracies, refusing to accept what they had seen with their own eyes. And through it all, Elon Musk remained silent, not a tweet, not a statement. Yet his name dominated every feed, every broadcast. Speculation churned. Would he finally launch the long-rumored third party? Could his words, so carelessly uttered, become the spark that reshaped the American political order? The silence itself became thunder, a vacuum sucking the nation into deeper debate. Cable news cut from jubilant Crockett supporters in the streets to shaken GOP strategists warning of a fracture they might never heal. At kitchen tables and union halls, Americans debated what it all meant. Was this justice served, or chaos unleashed? For the first time in years, politics no longer felt like background noise. It was personal, it was urgent, it was alive, and hovering above it all was the same question, whispered in homes, shouted in protests, analyzed in studios. Was this the start of a new movement? Long after the cameras shut down and the chamber emptied into silence, Jasmine Crockett sat alone beneath the dim glow of a desk lamp. The roar of applause had faded, but its echo still rang in her chest, not as triumph, but as a heavy reminder of what came next. For every cheer, there would be a backlash. For every supporter, a legion waiting to tear her down. Her eyes drifted across the polished floor, and in its reflection, she saw fragments of her past. The protests in Texas, where she had first raised her voice against injustice. The weary faces of families who told her they were tired of being invisible. The young girl who once grabbed her hand and whispered, "Don't let them forget about us." Each memory returned with haunting clarity, pulling her back into the trenches that had shaped her. Jasmine inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Tonight, she had confronted a titan, unmasked a lie, and carried the weight of millions who felt silenced. That courage was never free. It carved scars, it invited enemies, and it demanded resilience beyond measure. The cost of standing tall was knowing you could be struck down at any moment. And yet, she thought, that was the only way forward, because silence had always cost more. She leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her heart both heavy and unyielding. "This isn't about me," she whispered to the shadows. "It's about them, about all of us." The quiet hum of the empty chamber seemed to answer her, as though the building itself bore witness to her vow. Somewhere out there, America was watching, deciding what to believe, what to fight for, what future to demand. And in that fragile silence, one question lingered with the weight of destiny. Would America follow her lead? The nation held its breath as Jasmine Crockett stepped forward, no longer speaking to senators or rivals, but to the millions watching from their living rooms, their phones, their kitchens late at night. The chamber's light seemed to dim around her, isolating her silhouette in a halo of resolve. Her voice carried not with anger, but with a piercing clarity that cut straight to the bone. "Democracy is not loyalty to power," she declared, her eyes locked on the cameras as if staring into the soul of America itself. "It is loyalty to each other, to the worker who rises before dawn, to the mother fighting for her child's future, to the young dreamer who still believes this country can be better tomorrow than it is today." The words reverberated like a hymn, steady and unshakable, binding the nation to a truth too long buried. She paused, letting silence weigh heavy. The chamber seemed to shrink as millions leaned in closer, waiting for what would come next. If you want freedom, then speak. If you want justice, then vote. If you want change, then stand together, because no single leader, no billionaire, no senator will ever hand it to you. It belongs to us, and it always has. Her words were not a plea, but a charge, a spark that dared Americans to move. The final note landed with solemn fire, her voice lowering into something raw, intimate, almost vulnerable. "I've given everything I have to this fight, but the truth is, it's yours now. The question is not whether I will keep standing, it's whether you will rise with me." The camera zoomed in, catching the shimmer of conviction in her eyes. On the line, millions of viewers typed furiously, their screens glowing with the urgency of a nation electrifying. And then, she left them with a final question, hanging like a challenge in the air. What do you believe? Can America be free from political captivity? True change is never born in silence. It is carved by those who dare to stand, even when the ground shakes beneath them. Jasmine's fight reminds us that democracy is not a gift handed down by the powerful, but a promise kept alive by the courage of ordinary people who refuse to be ignored. Every voice matters, every choice shapes the future, and every act of courage ripples further than we can see. Freedom is not won once, it is defended every single day. When history knocks at your door, will you whisper or will you roar? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.